Textile culture in Pompeii, experimental reproduction of ceramic loom weights. The aim of this study is to investigate the textile culture in the archaeological site of Pompeii through the study of the related artifacts. This study is a PhD research which is part of the project Textile Culture in Pompeii, directed by Professor Marco Galli of the University of Rome La Sapienza in collaboration with the Archaeological Park of Pompeii, Ercolano and Stabia. An important contribution for Professor Cristina Lemorini, Director of the Laboratory of Technological and Functional Analysis of Prehistoric Artifacts, supervised the experimental archaeology and the traces analysis approach applied to this project. In this presentation, I will describe the experimental protocol adopted to study the ceramic loom weights. The first step of the experimental study included the preparation of the raw mixture. Since it has not yet been possible to analyze the exact composition of the clay of the archaeological loom weights, we decided to use commercial refractory clay. In this slide, it is possible to see the phases concerning the processing of the clay. We used a dried block of around 10 kilograms, which was crushed with a hammer and consequently rehydrated with water. Since during the preliminary macroscopic examination of the ceramic loom weights from Pompeii, the presence of sand in the mixture was noticed, we decided to mix half of the mixture with 1/3 of sand. Finally, a pointing stick and a hand twist drill were made to produce the suspension hole of the loom weights. In this slide, the steps of the experimental ceramic loom weights production are presented. In the first case, the refractory clay has been manually molded for 10 minutes to obtain a shape closer to the archaeological loom weights. In the second case, the refractory clay has been wrought against a wooden surface for around 2-3 minutes. If we hypothesize a production in series of hand-shaped objects, this methodology is the easier and faster. In the last case, the loom weight has been wrought with a wooden bar to obtain a truncated pyramidal shape. The time to obtain this object is around 6-7 minutes. Two main challenges arose during the production of the experimental loom weights. The first one, shown in this slide, is the presence of a lighter colored layer around the archaeological loom weights. At this point of the research, it is not clear the reason behind the presence of this layer. However, it is more likely that it is connected to the production of the objects rather than their use. The challenge encountered during the experiment was to comprehend how this layer has been applied to the object. We mixed a small quantity of clay with water to obtain a very liquid mixture. We tried 3 different techniques to apply the mixture to the loom weight. In the first one, we applied the mixture with a brush. In this case, the loom weight must be handled in order to apply the mixture to all the surfaces of the object. However, this procedure leaves traces on the object, such as fingerprints, that we do not observe on the archaeological loom weights. Thus, we will carry out other experiments in the next future to test other ways to apply the mixture. Moreover, the archaeometry analysis of the composition of this thin layer may reveal other possible explanations as the result of the reaction of the clay mixture itself during the firing process. The second challenge is represented by the creation of the suspension hole. We observed that on the archaeological loom weights, there is often a remnant of clay around the exit hole. An example of this is shown in picture 1, which might be generated using a pointing stick when the loom weight was still fresh. However, in the archaeological loom weights, we can also observe macroscopically and microscopically concentric lines that can be traced back to the use of a hand drill on a dried object prior to baking. We hypothesize that the suspension hole has been made in 2 steps. Initially, the fresh loom weight was perforated by a small pointing stick, and then when dried, the hole was enlarged and finished with a hand drill before the loom weight was baked. The experimental ceramic loom weights have been baked in a modern kiln for around 5 hours and have been collected from the kiln after 24 hours when they were cold. The maximum temperature reached by the kiln was around 750 degrees. Finally, in these pictures, we can observe examples of traces found on the experimental loom weights. In picture 1, it is possible to see the concentric impressions inside the suspension hole made by the hand twist drill. It is important to highlight that the same impressions have been observed on the archaeological loom weights. Picture 2 shows a series of grooves made by the wooden bar during the realization of the object. In picture 3, it is possible to see a partial fingerprint due to the use of the hands to smooth or create the experimental loom weight. Thank you for your attention.